Yeah, so we are live now. You can go.
Yes. So welcome to the first technical session of the conference, which is titled as Cities and Smart Urbanisms, Localizing Technology and Governance. The session will run from 11:15 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. And today we have with us Dr. Anu Sablok, who will chair this session. Dr. Anu Sablok is based at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Mohali, and she holds the position of Associate Professor. Dr. Sablok received a PhD in Geography and Women's Studies from the Pennsylvania State University in USA. She completed her bachelor's and master's in architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and Pennsylvania State University, respectively. Prior to joining IISER Mohali, Dr. Sablok has taught in various capacities at the University of Pennsylvania and University of Louisville, and has received various awards and fellowships. Her research interests focus on gender and the city, labor geographies, disasters and reliefs, and feminist pedagogies and methods. Dr. Anu, this session will run until 1:15 p.m. and each of the presenters will have 15 minutes to present, which will be followed by your comments on the papers. So on to you.
Okay, thanks Kiran and Aparajita for inviting me to chair this session. I'm also really looking forward to hearing all the papers in this session titled Cities and Smart Urbanisms, Localizing Technology and Governance. So if, unless anybody has a different way of going about it, what I thought we will do 15-minute presentations by each of the presenters, and then open this up for questions and a discussion. So if everybody can, note down their questions, but keep them handy for towards the end of the presentation, that will be great. Unless there's a clarification question required, then please raise your hand or type it in the chat box. I'll keep a track of that. And without further delay, I think we can start. The first paper is by Rahul Saikia from the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And the paper is titled The Multiple Smart Cities of the Contemporary Indian Mind. So over to you, Rahul.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Very good morning to everyone present. And I'd like to start at the outset by thanking my professors at the Department of Geography for this very timely and relevant seminar. I will share my screen. So kindly let me know if the same is visible, and then I can start my presentation.
Yeah, Rahul, it's visible, and I'll quickly indicate when you've kind of finished 10 minutes, like if that's
okay. Sure, ma'am. Sure, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, the title of my paper is The Multiple Smart Cities of the Contemporary Indian Mind. And I'm focusing specifically towards the genealogy of data-driven innovation in India's smart city mission. To begin with, just a very short introduction to what we think of as the digital revolution, which are the advances in big tech, in big data, and the advances in AI. Now, there are two narratives around this. The first is that big tech is invariably fundamentally oppressive and controlling, in that it essentially reduces nations and individuals merely into sites of data harvesting, brainwashing, manipulation, and monetization. Now, while this is true in many cases, there's also an alternate narrative, which is that the digital revolution can indeed be negotiated by various stakeholders who are looking out for their own self-interests and their sense of self-agency. For instance, nation states, it has been shown, can adapt, regulate, and support various aspects of the digital revolution to secure their own sovereignty and their own national goals of self-development and welfare. For instance, the Indian government has been actively regulating foreign big tech companies. Conversely, we see that it's played an active role in supporting Indian startups. Now, for its own part, the government has adopted and tried to appropriate various aspects of this digital revolution. So with this Digital India mission, for instance, we see huge investments being made to create large-scale ICT infrastructure and e-governance platforms. Now, moving on to the focus of this paper, it is to explore what I call a culture of data-driven innovation within the Smart City mission. And here I'm looking at three objectives. The first is to explore how this culture of data-driven innovation is being embodied and negotiated by various policies and professionals within the Smart City mission. And secondly, I look at how there's a constant renegotiation between the promises of digital solutions and then, on the other hand, the complexities and the realities and the needs of urban India. And finally, I try to locate this culture of data-driven innovation within the larger digital turn in India's polity and economy. Now, towards this end, I focus on three specific data-driven initiatives under the Smart Cities mission. The first is the Citizen Innovation Exchange. The second is the India Urban Data Exchange. And the last is the India Smart City Fellowship Program, where I'm currently a fellow. Now, I explore these initiatives through various sources, including policy documents, their corresponding digital platforms, through strategies of participant observation, and with in-depth interviews with various professionals in the mission. Now, the first platform I'd like to talk about is the City Innovation Exchange, or CIX as it's known. Now, CIX tries to connect city administrators to various startups that are working on urban solutions. So a startup that would log on to the CIX platform, for instance, would find itself presented with various urban challenges and business opportunities. As the picture here illustrates, a startup would log in and it would see that 64 cities are actively looking for waste management solutions. So in this manner, CIX hopes to recruit India's startups for solutions to complex urban challenges. Now, there are two interpretations to this that I can think of. Firstly, a platform like CIX reflects a major shift in that it establishes startups as a major stakeholder in securing national goals of development and welfare. Now, this particular policy can be traced back to the Startup India Action Plan of 2016, where the government started providing heavy incentives and platforms for startups. But the origins of this can be traced even further back to a working paper by the Planning Commission, wherein it stated that startups have great potential for economic growth and securing employment. Now, the second interpretation is that it's interesting to look at how a platform like CIX, essentially created by the government, establishes it as an aggregator, bringing together cities and startups just as a private startup would. Now, the idea of the government as an aggregator emerges from the Digital India platform, where it started creating e-governance platforms. And of late, it's become much more complex and open in the sense that the government is promoting what it calls the National Open Data Ecosystems, which seeks to bring in a range of collaborators and stakeholders towards devising data-driven solutions. Now, beyond my own interpretations, I spoke to one of the lead developers at CIX in the ministry, and I wanted to understand his views on innovation and government and in the role of government in innovation, so to speak. So firstly, this developer made a very strong case for digital governance, especially in urban India. He argued that if we look at solutions, if we look at digital solutions, they're already very much a part of the fabric of urban India. And so it's no surprise that government will sooner or later get into the act of digital governance, especially because capacities are already so low in India and they need to be scaled up. Now, this developer was a self-described Keynesian. He also recommended that I read a book entitled The Entrepreneurial State, where the author makes the argument that innovation finds its natural home in government. Two examples are given in that the Google search engine and even Tesla, it's argued that they have their origins in government grants to private entities. Now, when I asked the developer about the current status of CIX, he said cities are showing interest, but the larger challenge as of now is to clear up the regulatory infrastructure and the bottlenecks on the ground. Now, as we'll see, this particular aspect is a recurring motif. In Now we move to the second data initiative, which is the India Urban Data Exchange, or IUDX. Now this platform seeks to facilitate data exchange between city departments, government agencies, and the private sector. The aim here is to break down the data silos that we have in physical government departments, to digitize them and circulate them freely across a national database of cities. Along with the collaboration of private players, this is supposed to bring forth great government efficiencies and again solutions to urban problems. Now, IUDX, when it is fully functional, is aiming to bring in data from 4,400 urban local bodies. And so hence it will be the closest thing to a big data platform in the smart cities mission. Now, this brings us to the larger case for big data in planning. It has been argued that central planning essentially failed in the USSR because the process of data collection and analytics was carried out by human beings, and there was prone to error, to inefficiencies and corruption. And so we now have this case for central planning version 2.0 with AI, which brings forth enormous amounts of real-time information combined with the complex analytics of AI. Now, of course, this leads to concerns over government controls, citizen privacy, but also the more mundane or the grounded issues of the quality of data in the urban local bodies. And then there's the larger question of you might have all the data in the world, but how exactly do you analyze it and use it for social development or welfare? Now, of course, one can read parallels between this present moment in data collection and planning with previous exercises like the census and Mahanopolis's central planning scheme. Of course, while the scale is different, the underlying idea is still the same. You generate enormous amounts of data, and that helps you in better planning. So there are like proponents for and against this. But at the time being, there are more practical challenges for data platforms. For instance, once a data sharing platform like IUDX has been created, there's a larger challenge of getting ULBs and departments on the ground on board. And this brings us to a larger question here, which has been explored by some scholars, is the Indian government essentially creating an entire superstructure of websites and apps? And now it has the much larger challenge of actually tying them down to citizens and government departments and engaging them. Now, 6 in IUDX emerge out of fellowships such as the India Smart Cities Fellowship program. Now, the program, is meant to provide young professionals with a platform where they can explore innovative data-driven solutions for urban challenges. The first half of the fellowship takes place in New Delhi, where fellows are inducted and they go through an ideation process where they learn the fundamentals of design thinking, systems thinking, how to empathize with stakeholders on the ground while creating urban solutions. So all of this is a very free-flowing tinkering lab sort of setup. And this is then followed by a second half where the fellows are deployed to a city where they have to try and pilot a possible solution. Now, my analysis here is based on participant observation over the last 6 months as a fellow, along with interviews with senior administrators and fellows. Now, one of the first things that I notice is that one experiences a dichotomy in such a fellowship. You feel a sense of the promise of data-driven innovation. For example, one can think of a hypothetical citizen redressal platform where you can take care of all the queries and complaints of citizens and reply to them accordingly with municipal services. And then suddenly there is the other experience when you're hit by the challenge of ground realities, when you ask yourself the question, if there is actually such data on the ground to support such a platform, if people are actually interested, or if there are enough municipal resources and workers to support this kind of initiative. And so a constant negotiation takes place between the promises of data and ground realities and the need to align solutions accordingly. Now, I posted these questions to a senior administrator with the mission. And this particular person felt that the fellowship was as much about innovation as it was about negotiating these ground realities. For instance, the tasks of learning how to deal with municipal employees, developing a good relationship with them over endless cups of tea. So that too is innovation when we go to the ground level. Now, this senior administrator explained that once the fellows go through both these experiences of innovation and ground realities, they can then be absorbed into the ministry, into think tanks, or into the larger startup ecosystem. Yet, despite all this excitement and this activity, the administrator cautioned that this culture of innovation is still very much in its infancy within both the smart city mission and the larger government structure, right? As for the people I've spoken to in the fellowship, there's both a sense of appreciation and uncertainty. For instance, one colleague explained how the fellowship is like getting to start my own startup, to bring forth a socially innovative idea, to have a team, to create a team, to have a professional, to develop a professional network. And at the same time, then the uncertainty over government delays, over lack of city support, and if in fact certain innovations are actually viable on the ground. And so what happens now is that we see
less than 4 minutes left.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I'll try to wrap up. And so what we see now are certain emerging trends out of fellowships, I would argue, such as these, where the participants constantly shift between risk and caution. So there's a tendency towards thinking of radical innovation, of brand new solutions that can fix urban problems, and sometimes getting that right, versus a much more cautionary, incremental approach, which seeks to build upon existing systems. Now, in the end, it is my argument, and that of several other people I've spoken to in the fellowship and the ministry, that it is only the locally relevant solutions that will survive. And finally, in conclusion, I'd like to say that this particular this culture of data innovation is emerging within government, even though it's in its infancy. And like any other new endeavors with great promise, this process will be marked both by trials and errors. It'll be marked by moments of disappointment and moments of great optimism, all of which reflect the complexities of digital innovation and the realities and complexities of Indian urbanization in its many forms. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Rahul, for a very interesting presentation. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions as we move along. We can straight away move on to the next presentation, where I also see your name, Rahul Saikia, Yatin D, Rahul Saikia, and Swati Pradhan from the National Institute of Urban Affairs. So, Yatin, if you can pick on from here, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I'm just sharing my screen. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah, you can make it full screen right now.
Yes. Yeah, now I think it's visible.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, so taking up the cue from Rahul, where locally solutions are relevant, and that's where they become relevant to the smart cities mission as well. So we have taken the topic of place and path dependency and how this affects the smart cities mission. So starting, the smart cities mission was started with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs with the name of creating 100 smart cities. But however, the subject of urban development comes under the 7th schedule. And in the 7th schedule, it comes under the state list, indicating that it is a state subject. So at the end of the day, states and cities have a say in the projects that are going to be implemented under the smart cities mission. So what we have done is, we want to see how the local characteristics affect the projects in the cities. So these by characteristics, we include the resources, requirements, geography, polity, history, etc., and other characteristics of the state and the city that are going to influence the smart cities mission. So in this version of the paper, we have taken into consideration the South Indian and the Northeastern cities that and analyzed how their characteristics have influenced the smart cities mission implementation on ground. So the methodology we have followed is, we have taken, there are two indices from the MHUA, that is Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. One is the Municipal Performance Index. This index takes into consideration governance, technology, planning, service, and finance, indicating the characteristics of the city. So on one hand, MPI gives the city characteristics, while on the other, there is the smart cities rankings, which indicate the performance of cities in terms of completion of projects. So we have correlated MPI with this smart city index, which clearly show, as you can see on the screen, so better performers in the municipal performance index have ended up performing better in the smart cities ranking as well. This indicating that city characteristics have determined the smart cities mission implementation on ground. However, these two indices do not give a full picture of how the smart cities mission is happening on ground. And thereby we have looked into media reports, government and other websites and other official websites to get a better picture of how local characteristics determine the implementation of the mission. I would like to start by quoting few projects and how the local dependency factors have affected the implementation of these projects. Starting with the Chappan Dukan. Chappan Dukan is a place in Indore. It's a 200-meter long street consisting of 56 consecutive shops selling street food. Under the Smart Cities mission, this street was revamped and changed into a vehicle-free zone with mechanized parking, with designer pavements, new facades, and LED lightings. And Indore is known for its food and confectionaries businesses. Also, it is one of the cleanest cities in India. So keeping these two factors in mind, the Chappan Dukan project fit the local needs of the city, thereby making it a very successful project in Indore. The next solution, the next project I would like to talk about is the digital libraries in Tumkur. Tumkur is the educational hub of Karnataka after Bangalore. And what more do students require than a library, especially at the time of a pandemic? So they came up with a digital library solution, which currently has seen more than 1 million users, and are planning, and this project is being planned to be replicated in various cities. So under the Smart Cities mission, the digital library solution catering to the local needs of Tumkuru has seen the light of the day. Moving on to Chennai, as we know, Chennai is known for its urban floods, and a restoration project has made an excellent progress in the city as people have been receptive because they have faced losses due to these urban floods, and people have been receptive that these extreme events have to be tackled. And under this project, there was desilting of more than 3,000 water bodies by removing water hyacinth and other garbage in the ponds and other water bodies in the city to make sure the extreme events like urban floods can be mitigated. So it's the receptiveness of the citizens that ensured successful implementation of this project. However, there were few projects that did not see the light of the day. As we can see, one is the eco restoration, the Assi River of Varanasi, where it has claimed awards under Smart Cities mission. But however, few media reports indicate that the Assi River has not been fully cleaned yet. On the other hand, as you can see in the picture, this is a picture in Newtown of Kolkata, where they made separate cycle streets under Cycles for India Challenge. But however, as you can see in the picture, there are more vendors on the cycle path rather than cyclists using it. So now this was project-based examples. Now coming to how cities' characteristics have affected the mission, much more macro analysis of the issue. So a city of Bangalore, the capital of Karnataka, has multiple parastatal agencies. This has been a defining feature of Bangalore, where for water there is one, for electricity there is one, and for roads there is another. And to substantiate this point, the state government of Karnataka has come up with the BMLTA bill, that is Bangalore Municipal Land Transport Authority Act. Bill. So this bill tries to streamline various organizations that are taking care of transport in the city, indicating the presence of multiple parastatals. Now, how has this affected the mission? There are, under the banner of Tender Sure, the Smart Cities mission has looked at revamping roads and developing connectivity, as Bangalore has been an ever-expanding conurbation. But however, multiple clearances required by parastatals, and if these clearances are given for building roads, they are given at one stretch. Therefore, multiple road projects starting at once and leading to a counterintuitive outcome of creating more traffic congestion. And data indicates that 73% of citizens in Bangalore who travel by road waste their time stuck in traffic jams. So indicating that multiple parastatals has affected the implementation of Smart Cities mission. Now, moving on to the next aspect. Bangalore is the startup capital of India. Now it has been replaced by Delhi as per the economic survey, but however, it is still the Silicon Valley of India, containing 14 of the 32 unicorns in the country and the second fastest growing city. But still, you'll be surprised to know the technology score as per MPI of Bangalore. Of Bangalore's ULB is 26.21 out of 100. So the startup capital of India and the IT capital of India, the ULB has a technology score 26.21. That's very ironical in nature, but this is because most of the startups and private agencies perform the functions of the ULB to some extent. So, for example, for environmental conservation, there's a separate startup in Bangalore. For water scarcity or for water protection, is a separate startup. For a matter of fact, even the grievance redressal mechanism of the ULB is to an extent being outsourced by a organization called Janagraha. So indicating that entrepreneurial capacity of the city is determining the implementation of smart cities mission in Bangalore. Moving on to next city. So this city is a classic example. Amaravati, it is currently the declared capital of Andhra Pradesh. And this is a classic example of how politics of the day has affected the great visions. So to explain this, I would like to go through a timeline. Starting in the year 2014, when the Andhra Pradesh was created and after bifurcating from Telangana, and the then Chief Minister passed a CRDA Act, that is Capital Redevelopment Authority Act, and announced Amaravati as a smart city, as like a greenfield smart city, with providing state-of-the-art amenities. So as you can see, the right side picture indicates what Amaravati was envisioned. So, and then in the year 2015, it was a cash-strapped government. As money was needed, they introduced a land pooling scheme where they got in land from the farmers, and in return, they would provide developed land back to the farmers after a certain time. So now the resources were ready and the vision was set. However, and thereby making Amaravati in 2017 a round 3 smart city, which set a perfect ground for smart cities mission to be implemented, as it was a greenfield city. But the future had other plans for Amaravati because of the state election. The state election changed the government. So the current government in power had a different ideology. They focused on balanced regional development and said Amaravati would not be the singular capital as it was envisioned previously, and the state of Andhra Pradesh would have 3 capitals. As a result, the Andhra Pradesh Decentralization and Inclusive Development Bill 2020 was passed, also known as the 3 Capital Bill. And under that bill, Amaravati, Visakhapatnam, and Kurnool were decided as the capitals of Andhra Pradesh. As expected, this created furor in the city of Amaravati. But however, and this led to the cases being put in courts, and the most recent High Court judgment in the year on 3rd of March 2022 repealed the 3 Capital Bill and reduced it back to the status of CRDA Act and directed the current state government in power to build Amaravati as it was envisioned, thereby indicating that Amaravati, being envisioned as a great greenfield smart city, has revived hopes of becoming one again as because of the High Court's judgment. So indicating how politics determine the status of the smart city, especially in the case of Amaravati. Now moving on to the next, Hubli Dharwad. This is a tier 2 or tier 3 city in the state of Karnataka. And mostly this city lacks basic urban infrastructure. And though not implemented under the Smart Cities mission, the Hubli Dharwad bus rapid transport system was a very successful project, as this BRTS is, as Hubli Dharwad being a twin city, BRTS was much required to travel between the 2 cities. So projects focusing on urban infrastructure always was very given. It got good reception from citizens. So similarly, under the Smart Cities mission, a 24/7 water supply system was devised with the help of the World Bank. Though it's in the current implementation stage, this project has been, in the first phase, has been very successfully implemented, thereby indicating catering to the local needs of the city and what the citizens require, most of the times, see light of the day. But on the other hand, in the Smart Cities proposal of Hubli Dharwad, it was written that it wanted to be the next IT capital after Bangalore in the state of Karnataka. But the most fundamental thing required for such a vision is a good technology score. And as per MPI, technology of Hubli Dharwad is in the lower ranges. So indicating that city was not made for such a high value investment. And it is also seen that several media reports have indicated that big ticket investments have not been done in the state of Hubli Dharwad. Another point supporting this argument is when is when Hubli Dharwad is a manufacturing city with the presence of more medium and small enterprises that help generate its economy, and not the service-oriented industry, which is required to make it a technological hub. So moving on to our next city.
We have 4 minutes left, Yatin.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So moving on to our next city in the Northeast, which is Shillong. So firstly, coming to the regional characteristics of Northeast, it has a remote location and a harsh terrain, leading to its economic constraints and low technology levels. In fact, the MPI and MPI Municipal Performance Index and Ease of Living score for the northeastern cities under the Smart Cities mission have been less than 35 out of 100, indicating the low rate of completion of the Smart City mission projects. Now, particularly in the case of Shillong. So Shillong comes under the 6th schedule, and thereby the local people have more say in their projects than the ULB itself. But the urban local body is fundamental for implementation of the Smart Cities mission. Thereby, most of the area in Shillong coming outside the jurisdiction of the municipality. So this polity, the structured polity of Shillong is affecting its Smart Cities mission. So another example I would like to give, apart from the 6th schedule, is the governance issues. So the Shillong has seen several government issues and has a poor track record in it. And to substantiate this is one of the area-based development projects of smart meters. Under this project, 100% work certificates were given for work completion, but however, on ground, 0 meters were installed. So the governance issue, accompanied by the political issues and the structure of polity, has affected the Smart Cities mission implementation in Shillong, making it one of the low-performing cities. So in conclusion, what we'd like to say is that local characteristics and taking into consideration their dependency will make projects successful in the city. And the second, it should be remembered that Smart Cities mission is going to end after 10 years and maybe in this or the next year. And the projects under this Smart Cities mission is going to be handed over to the ULBs, indicating the longevity and the success of the project is in the hands of the urban local body, thereby making projects that cater to local characteristics see the light of the day rather than projects that do not cater to local needs. So despite Smart Cities mission being implemented by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs at the center, it is the city characteristics that determine its success. Thank you.
Thank you, Yatin, again for showing us how all these local, variations of a centrally conceived project have played out at multiple locations. And we'll look forward to the discussion after the whole session. Everybody's presented. We have two more presentations. The next one is by Ovia T, also from the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And it will be on the subject of a study of grassroots initiatives with a digital footprint, which are working towards empowering local communities. So Ovia, over to you.
Hello, good morning. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ovia, India Smart City Fellow, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and National Institute of Urban Affairs. My research paper that I am going to present today is on a study of grassroots initiative with digital footprints working towards empowering local community. The internet and other communication technologies can provide a powerful tool for social justice and civic action. The various digital initiatives taken by the government in India that aims for development and growth. However, in most of the cases, these digital initiatives are inaccessible and excluding the marginalized communities in our cities. Despite of this digital exclusion, there are various actions taken at the community level with help of local civil society organizations that focus to empower the marginalized groups in our cities and towns through various digital footprints. The study majorly focuses to analyze how the community-led digital initiatives in the education sector that bridges the gaps and documenting the impact of these interventions at community level by the members of the community along with their motivation for it. The methodology followed for this research was single case study methodology, which was a qualitative study. Hello, I think someone have to unmute. Yes. So single case study methodology, qualitative study, where I took a case of Nalanda Academy, Varda, which is a community initiative that works for the welfare and empowerment of the marginalized students. I took an in-depth interview of the founder of the Nalanda Academy and also did an online ethnography study where I observed the works and the initiatives of the Nalanda in different social media platforms, and also the interaction of the Nalanda Academy with the community members and how they use social media to improve their visibility. I finally did a narrative and discourse analysis of my data. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, Nalanda Academy is a team of educators with a mission to provide academic support to the underprivileged students in India. The Academy has many initiatives like Nalanda Library in about 18 rural areas around India and Digital Nalanda platform to empower the marginalized student through the use of digital platform. And students of Nalanda Academy who are from extreme marginalized background in almost 15 states of India have reached the different premier institutions in India and abroad. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic posed unprecedented challenges for national education system. All learners have impacted by the disruption of learning. However, the education crisis have mostly affected vulnerable and marginalized learners. Unequal access to information and communication technologies, that is basically digital divide, is a fundamental problem for digital teaching. There is no unified definition of digital divide. There is no unified definition for digital divide, generally specified for areas of importance, attitude, access, skills, and types of usage. While access to technology is less a problem in the developed world, skills and usage gaps exist. Digital technologies and their use within seminars and distant learning can have positive benefits for the learners. Example, new ways of interaction for the learners and teachers. However, the availability, physical access, accessibility, usability, and acceptability, that is social empowerment of such learning formats, can be difficult for students who are unfamiliar with them. However, in developing countries have both the problems of access of technology and also skill to use them. In such cases, community initiatives build initiative to overcome these digital divides by localizing the digital technology. As I said, I gave a brief introduction to Nalanda, which was initiated in 2018 with 22 students at Varda district in Maharashtra. Nalanda Academy is a team of educators with a mission to provide quality academic support to the underprivileged students. The motivation behind the creation of such institution is through the experience of the founder in higher education institutes. He realized that there is a strong prevalence of caste prejudices and stigmatization at greater level in higher educational institutions. He emphasized that there was a general notion that caste has been an issue of rural regions, while urban areas have been seen as a place that eradicate and dismantle the caste identities or place that provides liberation from the caste. But in his experiences of living in urban areas for his higher education, that notion had been broken down because of his encounter with severe caste-based discrimination in the higher education spaces. He got an opportunity to attend several higher education institutions of engineering and social science. The first thing that he encountered in those spaces was humiliation and discrimination of Dalit and Adivasi students by both students and faculties in the institute. The firm belief of them that entering higher education institutions would immediately lead to upward mobility that would eventually make the marginalized student escape caste discrimination was proven to be false because of the strong persistence of caste in these spaces. Despite the attainment of higher education, of the involvement of faculties in caste-based oppression gave him realization on how education neither eliminating caste mindset from the upper caste nor eradicating caste identity of oppressed. These discrimination or oppression have made many marginalized students to lose self-esteem and dwell in self-doubt, leads to many psychological traumas, and in extreme cases to drop their higher education. This is the case almost in all higher education institutions. Also, somehow in these urban-based higher education institutions alienate the marginalized not only on the basis of caste, but also by English language and economic backwardness, which is closely associated with their social identities. Most of the marginalized students who would be first-generation graduates from rural and suburb regions lack role models, the proper guidance of available opportunities, and a space that creates sense of belonging. This was the motivation behind establishing Nalanda. Because of the social cultural history of Maharashtra and influence of Buddhism in the Wada region, have already had an awareness of importance of education despite of not having enough resources and access to it. Also, Wada, one of the backward and most underdeveloped region, which is known for the suicide of farmers every year, with the lack of many other resources that prevent development and growth of the region. Establishing a community-led initiative, the primary goal of Nalanda is to create a safe space for the marginalized student where they won't be judged for their lack of fluency in English, accent, the way they look, for the social economic background they belong to. According to him, Nalanda should be a place that provides confidence in the marginalized children, they are in no way less to the people. He pointed out that it is not the students from the marginalized section or talented enough or not hardworking, but it is just the several layers of marginalities with struggle of caste-based discrimination. The students are in constant battle with no guides and role models. If there was a guidance in their life, would have introduced the possibilities and opportunities in the world beyond the villages and towns. The idea of inclusion from the viewpoint of the state is mostly restricted to gender, elderly, and people with a disability. It is not extending its focus on the caste and religious minorities and the intersection of these marginal identities. But Amit Kumar emphasized that his major focus was to make students from extreme marginal backgrounds, those who are mostly not represented in his higher education background, for example, non-majority of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, nomadic denotified tribes, and most backward caste groups benefit from such spaces because they have not represented and able to participate in the anti-caste movement as well. Still, he have certain major criteria for admitting students into Nalanda Academy. That is, students from non-English medium background, they should be from rural areas. Half of the seats are reserved to women students. The more the student is weaker, the greater the chance for the admission into Nalanda Academy. But the digital aspect of Nalanda Academy began with the realization and understanding of the importance of the STEM studies. There was always a need of the marginalized students to get into the STEM education because that would be empower the marginalized, and also ensure that all students recognize opportunity and possibility of future success in the STEM field. STEM education, when made relevant to the interest of individual students, has been found to crucial in developing students' sense of agency and academic success. Students in historically marginalized communities may not see the potential for a career in STEM field due to not knowing anyone from their background with a STEM career who are successful. Nalanda Academy conducted various workshops and training courses in different parts of the nation that pave way for the students to get exposed to the technical learning and admission into STEM education. Marginalized students, because of the economic and educational backwardness of their family, they could not afford the gadgets, even smartphones, which have become prevalent in the everyday usage of among the most. Since these students mostly had their education up to the high school in non-English medium public schools that located in rural and semi-urban spaces with poor basic infrastructure, where the digital and technical infrastructure are far more unreachable to them in public schools. With poorly trained teachers on computer applications and operating the digital tools, and also the exclusionary behavior of the teachers in the school, the students were never get an opportunity to learn to operate the computer.
Okay, you have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I'll just make it soon. This also based on the caste regional identity, computers in the lab are given very less time to learn. So this became the stimulation for them to found the Nalanda lab, through which they conducted 1 month long summer workshop on science and technology. The funds for such infrastructure have been provided by the upper middle class groups of the community. From 2020, due to the crisis of COVID-19, there was several significant challenges based on the traditional teaching methods and put them into a situation to send their 250 students back to respective places. This actually stimulated for the growth of digital Nalanda. The lack of smartphones among the many students of the academy could not access the lectures and online materials. The role of the community by donating the smartphones and Wi-Fi portals for the students with no access to it have actually created the logistic for the marginalized students who went back to home to continue the pace with the education. The reason behind the community support for Anup Kumar says us, above all, they felt the need of the continuous function of the academy with no break year because it would put hundreds of students in a disadvantaged situation and also make them drop from from the education. Not having enough competencies to handle digital platforms like Zoom, a shift from a traditional to online teaching was difficult, but through the help of alumni of Nalanda and also the learned technologists in different places in the community have helped them to overcome this battle. So as Anukumar says, community is not only providing them help and support through funds and material resources, but also through the knowledge and experiences that they provide. And the Nalanda Academy, in Digital Nalanda, they provide online trainings and workshops, not only to the traditional social sciences eligibility testers, but also extending their training to data science, Stata, and Python, because of this online platform, which breaks a technology, which breaks the limitation of geography and time. The well-learned people from abroad and also different parts of the India who are expertised in the technology have able to provide mentorship to the students in these courses. The low efficacy can be improved by mastery of skills and social role models, persuasion and positive experiences told to them from the people in the field from the marginalized identity. Digital Nalanda's School of Data Science and Information aim to build the self-efficacy through such guidance. The setting of digital infrastructure have took the benefits of digital technology beyond the students of Nalanda. So once the students went back to their respective places, when they established the digital infrastructure, access to digital infrastructure to them, even the students of the villages, their neighbors, their friends, and their siblings begin to attend the online classes of Nalanda, which actually extended beyond the students of Nalanda and also to the larger communities and the village people of the marginalized community. The success of Nalanda was that he mentions that they made sure that our students could have required infrastructure and support to operate them. This was possible only because of the support we got from a community. They provide guidance to the students to develop skills to learn to operate these platforms, since their parents and siblings or friends don't have enough knowledge to do that. In the time of pandemic, the learning loss and drop rates in both public and private school increased. However, the success rate of Nalanda, despite of COVID-19 crisis, clearly proves that the building a required digital infrastructure with constant empathetic guidance to enhance the ability to use the online educational resources to the marginalized students, the upward social mobility and inclusive education with equal access could be achievable. With the lack of social, economic, and political capital, community becomes the major capital in this case that tries to empower the children of marginalized community. This also reflects that only affirmative action and scholarships from the side of the government may not improve the accessibility and representation of the marginalized students, but many factors from unequal digital infrastructure, guidance, discrimination, or some reasons that prevents them that. This narration evidently proves on how the community creates an alternative institution to empower their own self without the dependency on the elite class, market, or even the government. In the last 3 years, despite of COVID and pandemic, all the 200 to 250 students of Nalanda have successfully cleared the eligibility tests and enter the premier institutions of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ovia. We can now move to the next presentation by Nikhil Sanjay Shah and Himanshu Kumar from National Institute of Urban Affairs. This presentation is titled Emerging Digital Geographies and Everyday Indian Urbanity. So Nikhil, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Ovia, if you could stop sharing. Well, yeah, is my screen visible?
Yeah. Could you just make it full screen?
Yeah. Yes, Himanshu.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. Today, we'll be talking about emerging digital geographies from the point of view of how the Smart Cities mission is localizing data and technology to cities' particular needs, specifically focusing on the integrated command and control center in the mission. Next. Okay, yeah. So this is just the basic outline. This is the next slide. Yeah, so a primer on data governance and development in India. So an interesting bit of trivia about the word statistics is that it is information which is used by states. And keeping with this maxim, development policy has been data driven from the very outset in India, from the Nehru-Mahalanobis days of central planning in the 1950s. As another interesting example, in a global contrast, the first use of computers in India was for development in processing the statistics from these surveys, not for military uses. Now, in the modern context, this has evolved into the language of evidence-based policy or evidence-based governance, in which many agencies are trying to find out the best government interventions using data and program evaluations like randomized controlled trials and outcome assessments. But most of the types of development interventions and the data that is being described here is survey-based data, such as the National Sample Survey or the Periodic Labor Force Survey, which is a bit slow, infrequent, and expensive to produce. Now, when we focus on urban governance and the development of cities within this context, it should be noted that cities are administered in a much more technocratic or bureaucratic way rather than being subjected to electoral pressures. Because the municipal commissioner has executive powers in Indian cities and is usually not answerable to the mayor. So going back to Friedrich Hayek's analogy of a central planner looking at screens, or a technocrat trying to optimize the economy, it seems that urban development in India does offer more potential for a more technocratic-led approach. Now, the basic point being talked about here is that real-time data collection and monitoring will have a counterpart in urban development and administration as well. Previously, this was the domain for purely physical or technical engineering processes like SCADA systems for water and electricity supply. Next. Yeah, so as Rahul went over, we won't say all this again. There are many data initiatives for the Smart Cities mission, and we are focusing on the ICCC, the Integrated Command and Control Center, which the ministry visualizes as a core part of every city's smart city technology. Next. Yeah. So just some basic concepts. So a smart city uses technology to harness interconnected information to better understand and control its operation and optimize the use of limited resources. The core technology is the Internet of Things, which is basically a network of connected devices, which can be sensors, meters, or cameras that communicate and exchange data, which is then stored in cloud and server architecture and can be used by end users, such as air pollution sensors or automatic number plate readers. Other technology at the user end includes application programming interfaces, dashboards, and machine learning AI applications for drawing insights. So basically, all of the information that flows in from the sensors is monitored, analyzed, and acted upon through the ICCC, which acts as the nerve center or brain of the city administration. Next. Yeah. As we know, India's scale of urbanization is unprecedented, and there will be a growing complexity of cities' needs. ICCCs represent an opportunity where data science and technology are playing an instrumental role in solving these problems, being set up in the 100 lighthouse cities of the Smart Cities mission, being currently implemented. And ICCC acts as the brain and nervous system of a city and enables decision makers to leverage real-time data for policymaking. And they have a total envisaged investment of more than 15,000 crores. It is an important point that these ICCCs are also visualized to break down silos between departments and reduce the complexity of dealing with multiple technology and administrative systems. So a city administration can efficiently handle all problems, regardless of which specific department it falls under. Next. Yeah. So in the ICCC process framework, there are 4 layers, or you could say components. The first is data acquisition, in which the sensors or meters or devices deployed in the field are geo-referenced, and real-time data is streaming into the ICCC. The data analytics is the second component, when all of this data that is flowing in from the sensors is integrated with other data sources and then correlated and analyzed for insights to produce alerts based on predefined levels, diagnostics, and predictive analysis. The communication component means that once the city administration knows what is happening, basically, they can communicate with either citizens, responders, or their own staff to modify the behaviors generating the data. And finally, the command and control component means the city administration can directly step in to manipulate systems, like controlling sensors or systems, targeting response and staff deployment to exceptions, controlling daily operations, and managing emergencies. Next. Yeah. The ministry envisages that an ICCC should have three broad components on which it should be assessed. First is functionality, which basically says that the ICCC should be able to manage a range of different municipal functions and services, emergencies, flows such as traffic, air, and water, and also convergence of applications. The governance layer means that ICCCs need to have a robust and rigorous policy framework, the human resources, and the organizational design to cut down on interdepartmental conflicts. And finally, the technology layer means that whether the technology systems being used in the ICCC are interoperable between, say, different departments or different agencies, and also whether the technology in the ICCC is being customized according to cities' needs. Yeah, this next part goes into the use cases of ICCC in cities, and Nikhil will cover them as he has been working directly in this division.
Yeah, thank you, Himanshu. So going further, currently there are 76 cities that have operationalized their ICCCs, with 24 cities which are in advanced stages of development. And as we can see from the bar chart, the majority of use cases or majority of areas where the ICCCs are functional are in the domain of city surveillance, solid waste management, traffic management, and e-governance. That's the major chunk of where the ICCCs sort of function. And these have become pivotal in addressing most pressing urban challenges from diverse sectors like security and safety, mobility, health, education, energy, e-governance, municipal finance, water, sanitation, environment, and disaster management. And a few interesting use cases, for instance, livestock monitoring is one of the use cases which has been uniquely sort of positioned in some cities like Vadodara and Visakhapatnam. Essentially, when we talk about ICCCs at large, they are the expected outcomes of ICCC are to improve access to information, making cities safer, improve traffic management, improve energy efficiency, encouraging greater collaboration, improved disaster resilience, efficient resource management, citizen delivery, and project management. So as Himanshu had already sort of gave us a larger understanding of how the data ecosystem and how the ICCCs function at large, we would be looking at use cases in a couple of cities to give a broad understanding of how the data acquisition, analytics, communication, command and control system sort of functions. So if you look at the system, for instance, in the city of Indore, and with regards to the solid waste management, the data acquisition is done through bin sensors, garbage vehicle and GPS position, vehicle GPS position mechanism, and then data analytics happens in terms of designing the shortest sort of route on a real-time basis for vehicle from the aggregation point to the point of disposal. And the communication component of it occurs where the citizens citizen notification happens through SMS and VMD and other mobile applications which are functional based on a city specific sort of scenario. And the staff alert sort of is a part of communication as well, which builds this kind of a bridge between the citizen and the municipal body and the staff which is responsible for the civic functions. And finally, the command and control component of it occurs in terms of routing of vehicles, staff deployment, and control of CCTV in the flagged zones. Say the areas where there's predominant dumping of solid waste in the public spaces and specific instances of this sort. And likewise, if we look at other cities, we'll be looking at all of them in more detail. But for instance, in Ahmedabad, CCTV cameras and ANPRs have been used for ITMS system. In Kochi, there have been smart sensors used for smart street lighting, and Atal Nagar Naya Raipur has a SCADA system which is used for citywide water quality monitoring. And in case of Chandigarh, we have e-governance portal where citizens grievance redressal occurs at large for multiple civic
less
issues.
than 5 minutes left.
So, all right. Yeah, we'll move quick. So with regards to Ahmedabad, the ITMS system, which is Integrated Traffic Management System, has incorporated the BRTS system and also the local Ahmedabad Municipal Transport System through common mobility cards and automatic fare collection system. And as an outcome of it, the ridership has increased threefolds from 2018, and the average wait time has substantially reduced. This has made the public transport a favored mode of transport and mobility for the city and citizens at large. For the city of Indore, we have observed that with GPS-enabled collection vehicles and door-to-door garbage collection, there is 100% elimination of waste dumping from public spaces, and the waste segregation as source has been encouraged through the system for more than 5 lakh households. Moving further, when we talk about the city of Kochi through smart streetlight system, it has been able to do real-time monitoring of power utilization, remote control triggering of streetlight on the basis of real-time alerts and changing luminosity as per the requirement. And when we talk about the requirement, it's not just the human requirement, but also of the nocturnal creatures and or the entire biodiversity at large. And this has increased the revenue of the city by 65 lakhs and reduced carbon emissions by almost 472 tons. And in case of Chandigarh, as we already discussed the idea of grievance redressal, currently it has benefited over to 1,200 citizens through interdepartmental management, where the civic issues have been addressed with greater efficiency. Moving further, when we talk about the potential of leveraging ICCs in cities. So we looked at specific use cases, but if we talk about, say for instance, the case of the city of Surat, which has the most advanced and highly developed ICCC, we observed that there have been initiatives done in the domain of WASH, safety, security, e-governance, mobility, and health, whereas the potential of ICCCs moves much beyond addressing all of these specific issues to tackling even more complex and comprehensive challenges which the cities face. Like in case of the city of Surat, the most pertinent issue which the city has been facing is the issue of flooding, and a comprehensive urban water plan, or if you look at the ideas in terms of carbon neutral cities or comprehensive walkability plans, then ICCCs through its entire data nexus has the potential to get into spatio-temporal analysis of all of these complex data sets and eventually address all of these issues. So finally, to conclude, we would say that there are definitely perils of quantification, and the tacit local knowledge or the micro sort of knowledge systems of a place is something which also tends to get lost in the process of aggregating all of this data and looking at the entire complexity in which the ICCCs operate. But at the same time, it also presents us with the potential of collaboration with researchers, academia, civil society for customized city-specific technology and smartness. For instance, as we already discussed about livestock monitoring, understanding the biodiversity of a city and developing the urbanity and the unique urban identity of cities in tandem with the ecological identity and these kind of complex sort of ideas can be certainly addressed through ICCs. The next to be transitioning from the methodological layer of better strategies to epistemological layer of knowing, which uses more data and information, to ontological layer where we fundamentally relook at the way Indian cities sort of are structured and exist in terms of its identity. And finally, moving on to evolving a participatory planning mechanism to address unprecedented urbanization in Indian cities and addressing complex urban systems with systemic and structural solutions and offering appropriate urban design solutions, as also in the case of Delhi when 2041 master plan was under preparation. There was a will for citizen participation at large, but the scale of urbanization and the population scale itself deters from a robust grassroots level engagement, and this is where these kind of institutional bodies where the data from multiple sort of use cases comes and becomes like this spatially embedded data, which has an interface between the citizens, the technology component, and also the governance, can build up new models of citizen engagement and participatory planning. Thank you. With that, we would want to end. Yeah, thank you, everyone. And reach out to us in case of any questions or comments or any deliberation we would like to have further. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nikhil and Imanshu. Thanks to all the presenters of this very interesting and session that like connected a lot of things and talked across a lot of different scales of, from the center to the state to the city, and also one particular initiative in a city. So a lot of multiple scales we've kind of moved through in this presentation. With that, I mean, I have comments and questions for all the presenters, but perhaps I think we should open it up to the audience first, and then I will kind of sum up in the end and also ask questions. So if anybody has any questions and thoughts, can you please raise your hand? Use the raise hand feature in, I think it's in reactions. And while people are still thinking about their question, I have a very generic question for all the speakers, and I'm assuming that you are all fellows at NIUA, and I'm curious about this fellowship program, about the Smart City Fellows. So if you could briefly kind of talk about that, and then Aditya Kala has a question.
Ma'am, the Smart Cities Fellows designed by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So here, and actually Rahul explained about the fellowship in his third initiative. So it's more or less the same. So we are currently in the process of mostly getting deployed to cities. We have few projects in our hands, which we have ideated through systems and design thinking processes. And these projects are now in line to be implemented in specific cities. So we are currently in the process of develop these projects already, but making sure they are aligned to the city's objectives and knowing which city the best the project can be implemented. So it's a 1 year long fellowship with an extendable of 1 year depending on how we perform in our first year. So yeah, so this is basically to encourage innovation and make sure young people can get into the government processes. This fellowship was made.
And I believe you're all from different disciplines.
Yes. So that's the idea which I wanted to sort of highlight a step further. So we are an interdisciplinary sort of cohort, and we come from various backgrounds like public policy, architecture, urban design, planning, anthropology, sociology, and economists. And so essentially it's a cohort which looks at the Indian urbanization and its processes in a very, very multifaceted sort of way. And that's the uniqueness of the mission as well, where it doesn't predetermine the kind of work which happens, but that is something which is synthesized based on all of these perspectives which build up over time. So identifying and defining the city-specific uniqueness and the city-specific smartness is what this fellowship is also all about. So there's a certain level of city agnostics which comes when one talks about digital solutions, but at the same time, how do you contextualize it within the entire urbanization paradigms across various geographies and contexts in Indian cities is what we also develop through this sort of fellowship program. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Aditya, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Hello, everyone. My question is, how important is greenery in general or urban forest in particular in the developing or even developed smart cities, and how can it be promoted? And more importantly, what challenges does the city administration encounter in promoting the urban forests?
Great. Maybe all the speakers can take few seconds or minute each to answer that question. It seems to be across. It's not a very specific to one speaker. I think it's a question for everyone.
Everyone, yes.
Yes, if I could just start off with a brief reply. I firstly feel this is more oriented towards Nikhil, but I just venture to say that when we are talking about green spaces in the context of smart cities, we really have to think about the aspect of citizen participation. Right? And so if there is a smart city, how do you bring citizens on board to come up with their own proposals with regards to how...
The others, please mute yourself. Sorry, Rahul, this had to, there's some intervention. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. And so I say this, that there should be an emphasis on bringing citizens on board into deciding which kind of green spaces and open spaces they would like to firstly clean up or restore. Secondly, if they would like to promote particular open spaces that have a mix of culture and nature, which also holds up the identity of a city. So one of the things that strikes us always about a metropolis like Delhi is that what makes the city bearable are its parks in the end of the day. And I completely agree with the person who raised the question that the idea of green spaces have to be integrated into any vision of smart cities. So.
Yeah, just to briefly add to it, one, as I've already mentioned, that the smart city mission doesn't really specify or has a very templatized way of looking at approaching the cities. So in that sense, moving beyond the anthropocentric sort of paradigms of the way we look at the notion of development is something which we need to depart from as well. So when we talk about Indian cities at large, how do you sort of build this entire notion of or this idea of an ecological civilization, which we have already been, is something which we need to revive as well. And I think I was very fascinated with your question as well, because even if you look at the smart city mission at large, there's no separate pillar of environment within the mission at the moment. So there are projects which are classified within the mission as being environmentally sensitive in terms of maybe say creating walkability or bicycle routes, but a separate head in terms of something that specifically focuses or emphasizes on preserving all of these local indigenous sort of forests and communities which have direct dependence on all of these systems would be a great initiative to take further as well. And how important that is, which you asked, I think all cities across India have been facing heat waves of unprecedented kind. We are almost touching 50 degrees in the city of Delhi. So it's time to sort of put the thrust of development and the idea of development onto the blue-green infrastructure of the city and also the ecological facets of the city more than any time in past. So yeah, it's a very pertinent issue which you've raised. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nikhil. Any of the other speakers would like to respond, or should we move on?
This is the second question. There were two questions. One was on forest and the other was what implementation issues the cities face during the Smart Cities mission. So basically the mission is implemented with the help of a special purpose vehicle, which works in tandem with the urban local body. So there are several relations that play out there. So some cities have been like successful in keeping a good SPV, the special purpose vehicle, and the ULB relation. While some cities there is some kind of a slack there. So depending on those kind of dynamics and relation, the implementation of the mission would depend. So this is just answering the second part of the question asked by Aditya, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you so much.
All right, great. I saw there was a hand up and then now it isn't. There, Piyush. Ovia, did you want to respond or should we move on?
No, I think the other fellows have pretty much answered the question.
All right, great, thanks. Piyush?
Yes, good morning. I would like to question on the third presentation, which was played out. Like, I wanted to know how does the caste play out in working through the digital? When people work through the digital, or when people are going through the digital, how can the caste play out, and how, can you throw some light on how it marginalizes the people from the lower caste?
So yes, my paper have analyzed, like, brought out two different aspects, like how it's not the digital platforms that discriminates the people based on the caste, but inaccessibility to these digital platforms among the marginalized communities that leads to exclusion of these people. So in that case, making availability, building this infrastructure that is accessible for the marginalized communities is necessary. In that way, caste plays a role. For example, how the intersection of class and caste and region is being constructed in our Indian society, that actually becomes a reason for the accessibility to the services as well. So in that way, caste plays a role. How it's been excluding the marginalized sections in accessing these digital platforms.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Ovia. Anyone else has a question? All right, while we wait, maybe, so I have a question each for all the presenters, and I'll start with Rahul, the first presentation. A very interesting narrative of digital and data-driven innovation in India related to the Smart City initiative. And I also kind of liked how you presented two discourse, like you analyzed two narratives, that of one as these data-driven sites as sites of data harvesting versus another one where you spoke about agency and ability to kind of tailor-make these data-driven innovations. I just wanted to push you a little more in terms of critically thinking through both these narratives, but also through the idea of data-driven innovation. I mean, it appears, and maybe this is just from your presentation and you have kind of thought about it, so it'll be nice if you can comment on it. I mean, it looks to me that terms such as innovation, smart, are a priori considered as good or positive. And discussions on like, is there something innately great or positive about, let's say, innovation? And can innovation be thought of as like basically a tool which can be used both in both directions? Similarly, smart, how are you defining smart? I mean, one is smart city, obviously, but then even that has a very vague definition of smart. So if you could kind of nuance these terms a little bit more and like tell us a little more about how you are thinking through this.
Oh, absolutely, ma'am, and thank you. That's a very, very interesting and nice question. And so, first of all, I'd like to say that there's nothing innately good or bad, let's say, in these signifiers, which we call smart or sustainable. Rather, we look at the ways, I think it's interesting to look at the ways in which people assign different meanings to these categories and how people construct ideas of what a smart city means to them, for instance, right? So it's very interesting that in the case of the India Smart Cities mission, the government, if we look at the guidelines for the smart city mission, the government has tried to negotiate its own objectives of creating basic core urban infrastructure in a developing country like India. And so right in the beginning of the smart city mission guidelines, it says that there is no universal definition of smart cities. And then it goes on to say that a smart city is one that can have these characteristics, some of which include basic infrastructure like water supply and electricity supply. So Bijli Sarak essentially is brought into the purview of India's smart city mission. And right after that, in the next paragraph, it goes on to say, however, we would like to, not these exact words, but we would like to bring about, we'd like to use smart solutions such as smart meters to augment these kinds of infrastructural pursuits. So that's one, the ways in which different stakeholders, including nation states, try to create their own constructs of smart cities, of what smart cities mean. Secondly, on the next layer, we have, I think Yatin's presentation covered that, on how cities then try to add their own meanings onto smart cities. Now, of course, in this game, in this process of constructing meaning, there are, of course, power relations and hierarchies at work. And one of them, for instance, when the government says that it tries to control big tech, there's a question of, on the one hand, it's the government's responsibility to hold into account large monopolistic entities, but at the same time, it raises questions over authority and citizens' privacy. And so we have that dynamic playing itself out. Now, when we look further down the stream of actors, below the nation state, we again see how sometimes a city or the people in it might outright just disagree with what a particular vision of a smart city might seem like, and they might come up with their own visions. And so there is a great politics of space and meaning that is being played out here. So that's how I'd like to answer your question.
Great, thank you, Rahul. I mean, I wish we had more time, and I would really love to know more about how this is happening. But and it's also nice to see that kind of criticality coming into an understanding of the smart city as you explained it. I will now move on to Yatin. Yatin and like your the co-authors. In your presentation, it was really interesting to see the different forms that particular projects have taken in the smart city implementation, as the smart city is being implemented in across the country. And each particular had its own flavor and its own challenges and its own aspirations. And you kind of brought that out well. My question to you is about the scale of intervention. We all know that the smart city project was conceptualized at the central level, and I think Rahul correctly specified also that city development is a state subject, and yet smart city kind of came up at the central level. And also in terms of how the implementation and the governance of this project is happening. There is the tension between the special purpose vehicle and the ULBs in terms of how it's being implemented. Then you also spoke a little bit about success and how certain projects you see as successful, whereas others you don't see as much. So my question is, how does scale at which the intervention is conceptualized, such as local versus state, at the state or regional or center, how does the scale at which the intervention is conceptualized play a role in determining its success? And then how did you define success? I mean, it seemed to me that you were talking about if the project is completed, then it's successful. Is that how you would like to see success? And are there simultaneous impact studies going on about if a project is about completion or what kind of impact does it have on the nature of the city that it's being implemented in? So,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. A very pertinent question. So, answering the first one on the scale of intervention that takes place. So, what happens is in the smart cities proposal, it was given. So, cities first submit a proposal to the center, telling that, see, these are the kind of things we want, and this is the plan we have to do this kind of things. So, but before that, there are a set of parameters put up by the center to show that whether these parameters qualify them to become a smart city. So what the center does is it just provides a broader framework under which the cities give their particular parameters or particular aims. So at the end of the day, it's the cities itself who decide the projects they want, but the funding is given by the center. So we have like round 1, round 2, round 3 smart cities. By these terms, what we mean is the cities submit the smart cities proposal based on a particular framework given by the center. And in that, they define the projects they want. So it's not like center is devising some project and being implemented in the city. So the scale of manifesting these projects is at the city level itself. But so our paper spoke about at the city level, how city characteristics determine the, the project success. So it's not like center is imposing something on the states. So they give a broad framework and cities itself decide. So that's answering the first part. Now coming to the question of success. So recently ministry has started with a something called OMF framework, output management framework, where under which
monitoring framework.
Yes, Himanshu, can you?
No, I was just saying outcome output monitoring framework.
Yes, thank you. Outcome and output management framework, which is exactly catering to the question you asked regarding, does success mean only finishing a project? Definitely not. So in our presentation also, we in few projects, in most projects, we check the number of users, the beneficiaries caused by those projects. So that was our more developed, that was our more orientation towards success and failure. But no, mostly we also have taken the line of there's no exact definition of success or failure. It depends what tweaks you need to make it a success. Because every project under Smart Cities mission is a long-term one. So it might not be an instant hit, but it's more of a learning kind of a process since the various factors involved in developing a project. So there's no explicit success or failure, I would like to say, but at the current point, we would the number of beneficiaries might be less. So indicating the aim of the projects is not completely achieved. So this was the thing we came up with in our presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Yatin. I now have a question for Ovia. And I think what was wonderful about your presentation is that you really delved in at the local and the community, what you call the community scale, and presented a case study of the Nalanda Academy in trying to empower the underprivileged based on caste or tribal status, especially, and looking at empowerment through an intersectional lens, and kind of forwarding it through providing and training and access to the digital sphere. So here my question to you is of how this project unfolded. I would be very curious to know. I mean, this is a lot of what we heard was from the perspective of the person who had conceptualized the Nalanda Academy and what the intention were and what they did in terms of achieving their aim. So I would like to know more about how those who were the beneficiaries kind of took this project on. And did they, when one, you talked about how some of them got into premier institutions or engineering institutions or into higher education. And that was one of the intended outcomes, I'm assuming. And I think you also mentioned. But then did they take it also, were there examples of them taking it in directions that were not necessarily envisaged by the Nalanda Academy? And if you can talk, if you have spoken to the beneficiaries, what were some of the creative or non-apparent or unenvisaged ways in which the ones who were beneficiaries of this project, kind of how did they come in as agents and how did they direct or change or challenge some of the outcomes of this project or this initiative? So, Ovia.
Hi, thank you. It's really a very interesting comment that you made and also a very interesting question. So, ma'am, like how the beneficiaries of the Nalanda Academy have helped or become agency of this academy in future. So the whole establishment of Digital Nalanda is actually with the help of the beneficiaries of the Nalanda Academy. Because the founder and establishers of the Nalanda Academy, they were actually stick to the traditional teaching methods, but it was the beneficiaries who went to several higher education spaces and also to the organized and professional jobs in higher positions. They actually introducing these technologies and infrastructures to the academy. And they are also constantly mentoring and guiding the current students of the Nalanda Academy. And another interesting aspect of this is some of the beneficiaries of Nalanda Academy have also established several such community initiatives in different remote, I mean, it can be rural areas or even in the urban areas, in the low income group regions of urban, in terms of urban context and all that. And they also constantly guiding the students to reach the higher education institutions and also to thrive in the academia and also in the spaces which the marginalized students have never been gone. For example, MNCs or the government sectors and all that. So the constant, actually the Nalanda Academy, the success of Nalanda Academy is not only guiding students, but also making the students to give back. And also creating a strong fold of the community and sense of ownership among the community, among the students, and also the beneficiaries of Nalanda Academy, I should be saying.
Okay. Thank you, Ovia. Finally, my comments to the presentation by Nikhil and Himanshu. Again, another very interesting presentation. I mean, all of yours really went through different aspects and layers of digitalization and the smart city mission. Nikhil and Himanshu, I was very intrigued by some of the some of the terms in the smart city mission or in this whole project, and also, like you pointed out, this very interesting fact that India was perhaps one of the first country to have used digital infrastructures, or where it was not initially driven by military, unlike the United States, but by projects of development. And I wonder if there is something about the tool itself, like digital technology is a tool that is driven to a more militaristic, maybe perhaps, since it kind of evolved with the military in, elsewhere around the world, way of working. And here I'm just looking at the kind of terms that you spoke about, such as integrated command and control center. Now that's very much a term from, I mean, it looks like very much a term from the military, and yet here it is being used for the purposes of development. Also things like how you mentioned these ICCCs are the brain and nervous system of the city. So by conceptualizing these very centralized nodes of control as the brain and nervous system of a city, are we kind of missing out on what might actually be, a whole lot of other channels through which the city is produced and created and built. So again, I want to build a little bit on that, also drawing from the Right to the City framework, which looks at the city as an oeuvre, right? Henri Lefebvre looked at the city as an oeuvre, where he saw that this was a continuously evolving process, and each person who's resident in the city has and should have a right to shape the city in the way that works for them, and it's a negotiating process. So by centralizing a command system, does it take away from the right to the city? I mean, I would like to know your opinion about it. How much of these, so this was my first question, like what do you think about the kind of very military sounding terms and their connection with the right to the city framework in the smart city mission? But also, and my second question is, you presented a lot of interesting systems and actually very well looked like, at least from the way you presented it, very well managed systems of waste management, traffic management, and it appears that all of these things are working and would work. But then how much, I would like to know, how much have these systems been designed by taking into I mean, a lot of these times, these systems are managed by large informal networks, very complex informal networks, such as waste management in Indian cities is a very, very complex and large system that involves kabadi wala, then kabadi ko ikatthe karne wala, segregate, like, ke karna, then all of that. And so how do these technical systems draw from existing complex systems, and how much are they basically outcomes of what is possible or not possible within a technology? And to that, I noticed that at least one of you is an architect. So there, for example, the coming of AutoCAD into the way we conceptualize architecture has totally shifted the kind of buildings that are possible, right? Than when we used to build many of these things. So how are these, like, how does the way of conceptualizing a city's infrastructure through technology as the medium, how does that shift our understanding and experience of the city? So I'll end it here, and over to you, Nikhil and Himanshu.
Maybe I can try a shot at the first one, and Nikhil can try the second one. So regarding the military sounding terminology of the ICCC and the context, I think these projects, the ICCC projects were already in process since the last 2-3 years, but I think it was during COVID, when faced with a crisis of epic proportions, when they actually jumped into the consciousness of most people and also government officials. So I think one thing which could be said is that most of our cities are honestly in a state of crisis, be it pollution or waste management or things like that. So maybe not exactly military, but this sense of crisis-driven management is important until we get things back under control in some cities regarding the military sound. And as for the right to the city, it does not seem that any component of the ICCC is infringing on or hampering citizens in any way. It's mostly about managing governmental services. So in a way, you could say that it actually promotes better citizen response and participation. And regarding the second one, Nikhil, do you want to try?
Yeah, sure. I think both are very interesting and very pertinent ideas taking further from the presentation. So as Himanshu rightly mentioned, ICCCs as an idea or an institution, they started around 2 to 3 years back, but it's only during COVID when a lot of ICCCs started also functioning as COVID war rooms. And that is where this malleability of this institution, where it could address grassroots level issues through the existing set of technologies, is what came into the forefront. And that is where, I mean, it might sound a little militaristic, but at the same time, currently it is also engaging with a lot of citizens' grievances. And the idea or the larger vision of ICCCs is to make it scale it up further from just grievances to needs, to aspirations and suggestions from the citizens as well. Because the nature of urbanization and the kind of processes which we observe in Indian cities, like if we compare it with Tokyo and other mega cities across the world, we have a very different sort of people's network and people's system on ground as well. Just the way you mentioned about kabadi walas and a lot of these other informal networks which exist in the city. But how they can become part of this entire also giving them a right and agency in order to sort of function in a more efficient manner is where ICCs become critical. Because even when we talk about the idea of vendors, recently there has been a lot of these sort of contestations onto who has the right to the road space and things around that. So ICCs, since it is the center where a lot of data capturing systems are already in place, and given the kind of technologies which we have in, regardless of any city which we talk about, at least there is a base layer to build upon, I would say, where at least if we talk about environment, the first layer, which is the methodological layer and the epistemological layer, that is where things are sort of falling in place, and we need to sort of build upon further in order to come up with holistic solutions at large, I would say, because as you rightly mentioned, with coming up of AutoCAD and a lot of these other digital ways of visualization and imagining the Indian cities and built environment at large, there is certainly a shift in the way we look at complexity of all of these systems. And within all of these larger sort of ways that I mean, there certainly, like when we sort of present something some kind of an institution as ICCC, we bring in this sort of inevitability of digitization at large as well. But how does one really incorporate citizens' perspective, and where citizens on the ladder of participation, how do we bring up the idea of citizen control and citizens being at the forefront, is where we eventually imagine ICCs to develop in the next coming decade or so at large. Because a lot of times, even when we talk about, say, riverfront projects, if we talk about Sabarmati riverfront project, essentially it was imagined as a monolith, sort of a site or one single piece of stretch, a 20-kilometer stretch within the city, which was looked upon in a very homogenized manner. But all of these finer nuances of how people associate with the river edges, how people find various kinds of associations, be it religious, be it livelihood-based, be it recreational-based, be it very, very temporal as well. That is something which was grossly neglected in case of Sabarmati, and that led to a massive level of gentrification in the due course of time. So understanding all of these complexities, at least ICCs become these places where one can take decisions with regards to establishing social and ecological equity within our cities as well, because the sort of thrust with various sort of use cases and all of the technology which one is employing is on understanding all of these complexities and interdependencies and interconnections. And how does one really look at optimizing all of these citizen services and simultaneously bringing up aspirations or different visions of Indian cities is what it eventually treads into. So on one hand, I do agree with the way it sounds, but it's still in a very nascent stage. And we as fellows are also in the process of shaping the vision of ICCCs further as well. And that's the beauty of the mission, the Smart City mission, I would say, unlike a lot of other government schemes, where there is a great room for a lot of accommodation and a lot of sort of place for it to grow with regards to time, I would say. So this constant feedback and how you take it further is something which is also the beauty of the mission. And we hope it becomes more and more people-centric, and beyond people-centric also, how does one look at the eco-centric side of it, moving beyond all of these anthropocentric sort of paradigms and looking at development from a very limited perspective to a larger sort of interdependency and interconnection is what we are eventually wanting it to shape up as. Yeah.
Thanks, Nikhil. So I have still more questions, but I think I want to open it up once again to if other people would like to comment or question at this stage. Then I will kind of put a question out there, question, comment, and this is for the speakers, but also kind of an open discussion is possible if anybody else from the audience would like to speak up in that regard. Is the notion of digitization itself And yes, certainly I see, and you all have all very beautifully shown the potential of the digital. But then there is also this association, which everybody seems to have taken quite uncritically, I think. I mean, maybe not, maybe because there was a certain agenda and you had to present that, of that as this being the solution to all the problems, one, but at the same time, this being the fact and this being the truth, right? Because digital doesn't, like the notion that digital doesn't lie, whereas people might, or digital is beyond, perhaps beyond corruption, perhaps. So that idea that there is this pure space that will now come in and will constitute both the truth and the facts and the data and be the solution also. So it's very much like one thing being you know, like an all-encompassing, it's kind of like a logic which is perpetuating itself in this particular discourse. And I will now break this down into a very practical, mundane issue, that mundane but very significant issue that has been happening across the country. And I see it very closely in Chandigarh at this moment. For example, how the Smart City mission has also been one of the contributors to the more recent bulldozing of, in Chandigarh particularly, for example, labor colonies that have been existing for the past 50 years. So there is, especially the digital comes in here is because the government said that anybody who was in the biometric survey taken on X particular date in June in 2006 will get you know, alternative accommodation in the city. Now suddenly this 2006 biometric survey becomes the only acceptable form of validated data in a situation where everybody actually has voter IDs and Aadhaar cards and pretty much a whole lot of other documentation showing they've been living on these now demolished sites for the past 50 years. So, so two questions come up for me here is, how do you think the Smart City mission, while understanding the immense potential of the digital, can bring in what you rightly said, the people perspective, if the data that is this is based on is basically data that is that also is digital, right? So that is one. And then second, what are the plans Smart City mission broadly, or maybe you can give me an example of any particular city where it has been implemented, has for the labor that is coming in to build projects under the Smart City? Like, are they expected to leave after these projects are over, or is there space allocated to them within very close to areas where they're working, so that they can actually you know, find stability and move out of perpetual generational poverty?
Can I start by replying,
Yeah.
at least to the first question?
Yeah.
So it's very important what you've just mentioned with regards to the power relations at work whenever a large mission starts activities in various cities or various sites. Right. Now, keeping that in mind, I also find it interesting how a mission itself is sort of a space which is subject to a variety of forces and ideologies. So during the interviews I was taking with various professionals within the mission, I found it interesting how some of these professionals within the ministry are for more technology in the mission, whereas others would like a scaling back of the amount of technology that's being used. Just to put this in perspective, if we look at the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs' entire budget, Smart Cities mission accounts for 10%, if I'm not wrong, looking at some of the annual reports. A much larger amount actually goes to PMAY, which is affordable housing for the poor, right? So there are various forms of politics which are at play within what we call the Smart Cities mission. Now, of course, we have to keep an eye out for when certain exclusionary practices seem to seep in to various missions. Now, this is interesting when we look at digital identities as a way of inclusion or exclusion, because in some cases, it might actually benefit someone to be in a list, and in some cases, it might benefit them to be off a list. And so moving forward, it'll be very interesting to see how people strategize and how how different governments and urban local bodies sort of negotiate this larger picture. Now, the concerns are there for all to see. Again, another point I'd like to add is how I was struck by the sheer magnitude with which certain what are called progressive agendas are also being accommodated into the mission. So climate change is on the top of the mission's agenda. And every time we speak to, let's say, some of the senior fellows, we recently had a meeting with one who said that whatever pilot we're going to introduce in whatever city we're going to, please make sure you look at intersectionality. And for a second, I was quite struck that such a suggestion is coming from someone in the ministry. Now, this is not to say that everyone toes that particular line, but just the sheer fact that you have all these various ideologies at play. So, even the idea of an agenda then starts getting splintered across the ministry itself in that aspect. Right?
Thanks, Rahul. Anybody else wants to pitch in?
Yes, ma'am. Answering your second question on the labor thing. So basically, it's the local how the smart city mission work is. There will be a project that's devised, and local contractors will be hired to implement. So these contractors then in turn employ laborers. So instead of there's obviously an in-migration criteria that takes place in most cities. But for a matter of fact, Smart Cities Mission, aiming for a balanced regional development, has selected 100 smart cities across the country. So in a way, it is trying to stop this out-migration and the in-migration criteria by creating local opportunities as local contractors are chosen to implement the projects in particular cities. So even you can see there's a few cities in the Northeast. Sorry.
Yeah, can you please mute everyone else except for Yatin? Yeah, Yatin, please go ahead.
Yeah, so the pattern in choosing these cities also takes into consideration this labor aspect, though it might not be explicitly stated. So it's in general, the underlying labor migration that takes place always ends up taking place in our country. But however, Smart Cities Mission is not specifically driving it. In fact, it is helping generate local employment as local contractors are employed to implement the mission. So then the question of what if after the mission is over is not it's not particularly because of Smart Cities Mission. The contractors will find new contracts for implementation. So in fact, Smart Cities Mission is trying to create a virtuous cycle of creating local employment by getting in local contractors to implement the mission. While definitely there's still a space if expertise are lacking in certain city on a certain topic, that cities learn from each other and some other contracts are given outside as well. So it's a mix of both that takes place.
Could I just add a point to this question about labor? So there's just a general point, I think someone might have mentioned it, is that urban affairs is actually a state subject according to the constitution. So the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, or even the Smart Cities Mission, has limited scope to act independently in a city. It always defers to the particular municipal corporation or the city administration. And most of the implementation details, including hiring of labor contractors, is totally up to them. So yeah, this element of federalism is also important. That's why I guess this ministry focuses more on building guidelines, standards, getting cities to learn from each other, because there are limited aspects where it can directly go into a city and intervene or take over functions. It's just not possible. Yeah, so yeah. At the most, the ministry can set standards and guidelines regarding, as you said, labor or other issues of interest, but it's up to the cities ultimately to follow them.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a bit on that, Himanshu, in terms of, but even within the city, it's a body controlled by the center, right? SPV is controlled by whom?
Yeah, so
the elected body, it's not part of the ULB. Who appointed?
Yeah. So the SPV is created as sort of a corporation, but all of the people in the SPV are mostly from the municipal corporation. The person who heads the SPV, who is called the CEO, is often, it's a de facto position of the municipal commissioner of that city only. The center provides funds, maybe consultants or project management companies might work in the SPV, but the final authority to make decisions is with the city authorities in an SPV.
Thank you.
Also just, sorry, man. So just adding a point there, the most of the subjects that Housing and Urban Affairs deals with comes under the 12th schedule of the 74th Amendment, which is like local aspects of water, urban local bodies, these subjects. So urban development is in the state, and the 12th schedule is the subjects that most of the MOHUA deals with, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs deals with. So just indicating that it's the city itself which is the last determinant of whether the mission is successful or like whether it is going to be implemented as per its needs or not.
Thank you. Thanks so much for these clarifications and nuancing the whole binary also in this particular case. So with that, would anybody want to comment anything? Has a question? Otherwise, we can, end the session at this point. And thank the organizers, Kiran and Aparajita, and also all the presenters for a very, very interesting and engaged scholarship that they have presented. I mean, it very clearly shows that you all have really been into the process and understood it and are also looking at it from multiple perspectives. And through the way, and also kind of seeing the nuances as it kind of enters into a more implementation phase. So thank you very much. And I would love to hear more about this at another time as you all proceed further into your careers in urban affairs. Thank you so much. Thanks to the audience also.
Thank you, ma'am, for this opportunity.